Have you ever gone to a winery and you're listening to the winery host talk about wine and you have no idea what they're talking about? Or maybe you're just over at somebody's house and you're enjoying some wine and they start describing what they're smelling and what you're tasting and it just goes right over your head?
Oh, I love Chablis. I love that rocky minerality and the tartness of the apple and citrus. It's delicious.
If you've answered yes to either of these questions, this video is for you. This is Wine 101, How to Taste Wine. Hi, I'm Reggie Norito, helping you learn more about wine one sip at a time. And in this video, what we're going to do is teach you how to taste wine. But before we start, I want to point out that there's a difference between drinking wine and tasting wine. When you're drinking wine, you're simply drinking a wine to savor the flavor and the aroma and of course enjoy the after effect. However, when you're tasting wine, what you're doing is you're actually analyzing the wine based on what you see, what you smell, and what you taste. It sounds difficult, but it's really not that hard. It's all about repetition. What do you say we do this? To start off, I like to answer the question, why learn to taste wine? And the answer is simple. To learn your own palate. I mean, if you're the kind of person that tastes a wine and says, oh, I like this, and that's as far as you want to go, that's completely cool. However, you'd rather say something like, well, the tannins are soft, which allows the fruit to shine through, you've done two things. Number one, you still told them you liked it, but number two, you told them why you liked it. And that's the key. Because if you learn your likes and dislikes, you're better able to communicate that when you're out and about, whether you're at restaurants, wineries, or you're over at somebody's house. Also, if you're looking to branch out, maybe try some other varieties or maybe some other wine regions of the world that you've never tried before, you can apply that same thinking. You know, I like this style of wine. Well, over here, they make the same style of wine. Maybe I'll like that too. And conversely, you can also contrast that. That way you can experience some different kinds of wines. So let's start off with sight. When looking at the visuals of wine, I first like to point the wine glass towards me and look at the middle of the wine. This gives me the core color. Next, I point the wine glass away from me and look at the edge of the wine. This gives me the rim color. It helps if you have a white background, but failing that, do the best you can with what you have. Now I'm going to help you calibrate the wine colors. For white wine, the colors can range from water white to amber brown. For red wine, you start at pink, then progress all the way to brown. Color can tell you a few things like grape variety, age, and climate, and these are all topics for future videos, but for now, we'll take it at face value. Use the color scale as a guide. Don't hold steadfast to it as a rule. The reason being is that there are different shades of gold. You could have light gold and you can have deep gold. You could also have different shades of cherry or ruby red. You could have light ruby red and you can have deep ruby red. The next thing you want to do is you want to check the viscosity of the wine. And the way we do that is we swirl the wine and then we hold the wine glass up to the light. And then what we'll see the sheeting of the wine down the glass, or some people call it tearing, or the legs of the wine. If the legs are well formed and they tear down the glass very slowly, that indicates that there are higher levels of alcohol. If the tearing is fast or faster and they're really very diffuse, then that means that there are lower levels of alcohol. The next thing we want to do is we want to move over to the nose. The aroma of wine can reveal so many things. For our purposes, let's consider fruit, non-fruit, earth, and wood. It's helpful to write all of these things down as you discover them. However, if you have a photographic memory, that'll work too. The next thing we want to do is we want to calibrate the ripeness level of the wine. With white wine, we'll start off with citrus fruit, then move to orchard fruit, stone fruit, melon fruit, and then the ripest, which would be tropical fruit. With red wine, we have red fruit, black fruit, and then blue fruit. A wine could have one of those types of fruits, or it could have two or three. It's up for you to decide. Now, when smelling wine, what I like to do is I like to swirl the glass and then stick my nose into the wine and take a short smell, and then swirl it again, and then take a second sniff, and then come up with the conclusions that I have. If you're struggling coming up with a fruit signature, that's okay. Because remember, repetition is the key. The more often you do this, the better you'll get at doing it. The next thing we want to do is we want to move on to the non-fruit portion. And non-fruit is basically things that are growing out in nature that are not fruit. So you could have herbs, you could have vegetables, you could have flowers, you could have butter, you could have a whole host of things. Next, we'll consider if the wine has any earthiness. Many of the wines we encounter in the United States will be fruit forward. And by that I mean when you smell the wine, you'll smell the fruit first. But there will be instances where the wine won't smell fruit forward. It will exhibit an earthiness. With white wine, it might be a mineral characteristic, like crushed rocks or maybe some seashells. With red wine, you might smell some potting soil or some mushrooms. So if you spot some earth notes in the nose, make sure you make a note of that. The final piece of the aromatic puzzle is to determine whether or not the wine has been aged in oak. And there are a range of aromas that would indicate whether or not the wine has seen any oak. But it really depends on whether or not the oak used was new or whether it was used. If it was used oak, the aromas tend to be a little bit more subtle. So something like cedar or wet wood. Whereas if it was new oak, it would tend to be sweeter, like vanilla, brown sugar, maybe even toasted bread or fresh sawed wood. So if you pick up any of those notes, make sure that you write that down. Now we'll move on to the palate. Obviously, we can't taste as many things as we can smell, but we'll do two things. The first thing is we'll confirm what we smelled. It's either there, what we smelled, or maybe it's not there, or maybe there's something extra. So that's the first thing that we'll do. And then the second thing is we'll move on to the structural components, where these are things that you can actually feel. Now it's time to taste the wine. Take a little bit of wine into your mouth and then swirl it around. And once you swallow the wine, take note of what you're sensing and refer back to what you smelled. Are those things that we smelled, are they still there? The next thing that we'll do is we'll move on to the structural components, things that we can actually feel. Structure is a very important component of wine. It forms the backbone of all wines and is really important when it comes to pairing wine with food. If we start at the tip of the tongue, that's where we sense sweetness. On the sides of the tongue, we sense acidity. Throughout your whole mouth, you can sense a tannin, and alcohol can be sensed as a warming sensation in your throat moving down to your stomach. Sweetness is pretty straightforward, but we'll skip that for now. So let's start with acidity. As I mentioned earlier, acidity is measured on the edges of your tongue, and you gauge how high acidity is based on how quickly the saliva comes back to your mouth after you've swallowed the wine. If it comes back immediately, that means it's high acid. If it takes a second or two, it's medium plus. And if it takes longer than that, it's medium. I haven't really run into wines that are lower than that, so we'll use that for now. Now let's move on to tannin. Tannin isn't acid. It is the component that dries your mouth out. Some people call it harsh, some people call it aggressive, but that acid comes from the seeds, the stems, the skin, even an oak barrel if it was aged in oak. And to determine how high the tannin is, you have to determine how much of it coats your mouth. If it coats your mouth to where you're smacking your lips and it's actually working on your teeth, that's high tannin. And then you just move down the ladder from there. Sometimes it'll just coat the back of the mouth. Sometimes it'll just coat the middle of your mouth, and you move on from there. Now let's go ahead and let's move on to alcohol. You measure alcohol based on the heat that you feel at your neck and how far it goes down your neck to your stomach, which your stomach starts right at about here. If it's low alcohol, it'll still be up here in the base of your neck. And then the higher levels of alcohol move their way down. So medium alcohol or lighter alcohol would be up in your neck. Medium plus alcohol maybe right around by your shoulder blades. And then high alcohol would really resonate and go right down about where your stomach is. And that's how you measure alcohol. The final piece of the tasting puzzle is the finish. Now, I'm not talking about whether you like it or not. I'm talking about whether you still taste the wine. Because there will be wines that you might not like, that other people like. But here we're just analyzing a wine to find out whether or not we still taste the wine once we've swallowed it. Now, if it lasts 5 or 10 seconds, this probably has a medium finish. About 15 to 20 seconds, it's got a medium long finish. And anything longer than that, I would consider that a long finish. Well, that about wraps up how to taste wine. Hopefully you've learned a little bit of something here, but if you still feel a little confused, don't worry, you won't be alone. It took me a few months before I really felt like I knew what I was doing. And remember, repetition is the key. The more often you do it, the better at it you'll get. Now, if you like the content of this video, I hope that you'll consider pressing the like icon. And if you would like to see more videos like this, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Thanks again for joining me. Peace out.